Okay, so let me start my timer. And timer's ready?
Got it.
Yep.
Okay, begin. Thank you for this lovely debate in this fine weather that we are experiencing today, and let us begin. Let me start off with a little background here about a country that we call Ukraine. Over the past few years, Ukraine has been going through many hardships, being constantly invaded by countries like Russia, wanting to take their lands and making them a part of their own. And what we want is for Ukraine to protect themselves from this kind of tyranny. And I believe that we are capable of doing just this. And we're going to discuss the name of the topic here is that this House would arm Ukraine. Observation 1, subpoint A, resolutional analysis. We reserve the right to define. And we're going to define this as a policy debate. Subpoint B, the terms. We're going to define this House as the UN. And we're going to define arm as give weapons and or troops to the country. Subpoint C, the plan, is to make the UN send defensive-based weapons, anti-tank, anti-mortar, and anti-aircraft weapons to the country so that they can protect themselves from any more invasions. And the cost is going to be $3 billion, and the funding is going to be normal means. And subpoint D is net benefits. What is your question?
How does the UN get access to these defensive weapons?
The UN. I said the UN, not the US.
Yeah, how does the UN get access to those defensive weapons?
They have a lot of funding, so they can easily afford these kind of weapons for the country, and we're gonna take action immediately. And let's go on to my first advantage. Would be advantage 1, Russia's economy. The harm is right now Ukraine has no firepower. It's outgunned by Russia. Despite the fact that Russia is going through some hardships in its economy right now, it's still more than capable of invading Ukraine and easily taking it over, making things much more difficult and showing any sense of improvement for the country. And the inherency is that Ukraine does not have the means to defend itself. They are a much inferior country to Russia. So if Russia were to invade the country right now, they would have no means to protect themselves. They're completely defenseless. And the solvency is that to give Ukraine to defend themselves long term. Like I said in my plan earlier, is that we're gonna give them the means to defend themselves. They're gonna prevent any more invasions from Russia or any other countries to become the big bullies in the schoolyard, so that they can become more prosperous. And the impact is that Russia will be less likely to invade with defensive weapons, and they will not antagonize Ukraine. So Ukraine can have some breathing room, so they can figure out they can figure out exactly where they're at, and they can grow from there. Our second impact is to prevent war before beginning. And you might be thinking, wait, if we're going to give them weapons, won't they become very hostile? But another thing is, we're going to say that they're anti-mortar, anti-tank, and anti-aircraft weapons. They're only meant to defend themselves. They're only meant to defend their country, not to invade other countries. So we're just going to give them defense-based weapons. So there's not going to be any war from happening. And despite that, I believe that Ukraine would use these weapons for good, not evil. And the third impact is that it will protect Ukrainian sovereignty. Ukraine is it takes pride in being its own country, and we should give them that open breathing space so that they can prosper well as a country. What is your question, sir?
Are you aware that these anti-weapons can be used as an offense as well? To use to attack people and not just like aircrafts or tanks?
But we're gonna give these weapons to people who are trying to defend the country. Wherever you go, there are always going to be those people who are going to use weapons for evil. That cannot be avoided. So that's why we're going to give these weapons to those who want to protect the country, not destroy it. And I'm going to go to my second advantage, would be giving peace a chance. The harms is that there is no peace in this country. There is constant conflict and constant stress because of neighboring countries. And the inherency is that Russia is applying too much pressure to Ukraine. And as a result, Ukraine is forced to reciprocate, but the reciprocation is not enough to keep them sustainable. And the solvency is that the plan will buy them time. It will buy them time so that they can figure out what they can do from where they're at. And the impact is that giving them these defensive weapons will give them an opportunity to make progress so that they can improve in areas that they are lacking. And due to the fact that they are lacking in weapons and defenses, that they are unable to create any way to improve themselves. And the second impact it will decrease violence. Since neighboring countries will now see that they are well armed and well protected, they will have to think twice before invading this country again. And
Talk about giving more time for peace talks to happen.
yeah, and as a result, these anti-defense weapons will give them more time for peace talks, which Ukraine hasn't been getting a lot of as of late due to the fact that they are constantly being bombarded by Russia. What is your question, sir?
Can you just repeat your A point and B point, or some of it? I just didn't get it. If you could, if you have time.
On the second advantage,
Yes, correct.
the harms is that there is no peace,
Okay.
and the inherency is that Russia is applying too much pressure.
Okay.
Yeah, and the third impact on my second advantage is that the UN will show a much peaceful side. There's been a stigma that the UN all they only do is they create war, but if we can do this for Ukraine, it's going to show you the UN that we are looking for international peace with other countries. They don't want to force their will onto other countries. They're gonna give the protection that Ukraine needs and the protection that Ukraine deserves. And I structured all these arguments very, very well thought out and clear for all of you to listen. And for these reasons is why you should vote for the government. Thank you. I titled it Peace a Chance.
One.
Oh, advantage one.
It might not have the time. You said advantage.
Yeah, I called it Russia's economy. Yeah.
Everybody ready?
Yes.
All right. Roadmap. I'm gonna get to off case, and then I'll get to case in the same order.
You have 5 o'clock shadow. Trying to psych you out.
So, the opposition team in this round thinks that the proposal to arm Ukraine will only lead to further violence and instability, and even a dangerous confrontation with Russia. And so, that's why first we're going to get to our disadvantage one, which normally we might go with case first, but I think a lot of our disadvantages will cross-apply to case, so I think it's better we get that out first. So, disadvantage one, this is taglined Russian response. The A point is that Russia and West relations are historically strained and antagonistic. The Economist has an article from November 1st of this year called Russia and the West Hard Talk, where it talks about the number of anti-Western speeches that Vladimir Putin has given, and where he threatens to increase his antagonistic qualities against the West as we do ours. The little A point under here is that the Russian government says that arming Ukraine will lead to, quote, colossal damage. The B point, the link, is that their plan equals Western action. The UN is, by definition, essentially a Western institution. It was started by an American president. Woodrow Wilson in 1914 outlined his points after World War I, and I understand that led to the League of Nations, but the whole reason that the UN was formed is because of the League of Nations. The UN main building is in New York, in the United States, not to mention the Western countries like the United States and Great Britain are all on the Security Council. So it's absolutely Western action. The C point, let's get to the internal links. And the reason that all of these are, we think, really potent is because Russia has more at stake in the Ukraine battle than does the United States. So the first internal link is it's going to lead to an increase in fighting as the West arms one side, then Russia is going to arm the separatists, as they've said that they would. The second internal link is it's going to lead to a decrease in diplomacy. There are diplomatic negotiations going on right now between, like, France and Germany and and Russia that have been happening this week. But if the UN is then to go forward and arm Ukraine in the midst of those negotiations, that's going to decrease diplomacy as Vladimir Putin sees that, okay, they're not really listening to me, they're just arming the other side. The third internal link is it's going to increase the ability for violence now that they have all these weapons that are a lot more able to cause massive damage. So just last year in the Ukraine conflict, 4,808 died, and that's without American weapons. So then dropping to the impact level here, one is you're going to see thousands of casualties at a higher rate. If we saw 4,808 in 1 year without American weapons, we're likely to see that same number, but increased with American weapons. As we know, American weapons are violent. The second impact is that it perpetuates this East-West antagonism. Now, this is an intergenerational impact that we think is really important. That when historically, from World War I to World War II, when Germany signed a pact with Russia and then Germany invaded from the West, there is this anxiety that exists within Russia that the West is always trying to invade or hurt them, and we think that's a hurtful intergenerational impact that leads to a dichotomy between the East and West that their plan leads to. The third and final impact, which is going to be cross-applied, is negotiations stop. Vladimir Putin stops negotiating. He says, you guys are are arming the enemy, therefore we have to respond, and negotiations will stop. Disadvantage 2. Proxy wars are bad. A point, Ukraine is becoming a proxy of the West, or was, and Russia wanted that, so therefore this is a war for a proxy. The little a under that is that Ukraine has government instability. In fact, their leader, Poroshenko, has only been in power for a few months. And then the third uniqueness point is that Ukraine forces are not trained with American weapons. The B point is that their plan basically increases this proxy war where it says we're going to raise the stakes and put more weapons into it. The C point, the internal links, first is we're going to see weapons to Ukraine, which is obvious. But second, internal link is it's difficult to monitor. Ukraine also has a lot of militias as well that are fighting on the border towns against the separatists that these weapons can get to. The third internal link is an increase in nationalism as Ukrainians start believing that now they have to take the fight on their own as they become more empowered. The fourth internal link is that more militia groups like we saw in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iraq when we got involved in those proxy wars, when we armed them, militia groups pop out, like Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. So dropping down to the impacts, first, you're going to see weapons end up in the wrong hands. It's very unlikely you're going to see them end up in Ukrainian military hands, as we noted the government instability, but rather it's going to end up in nationalist militia hands. Second, you're going to see outgrowths similar to Al-Qaeda. Third, paramilitary groups with American weapons based on a nationalist agenda. So basically, combine those last two, but what we're going to see is the same thing we saw when we got involved in other proxy wars. But the final impact, fourth, most likely this is going to lead to boots on the ground and a new Cold War, because this is going to raise the stakes. It's not going to make Russia be like, oh, okay, fine, we give up. We know Russia isn't going to do that, so it's going to lead to more boots on the ground as this war intensifies. And then when you have UN boots on the ground versus Russia, then you have East versus West Cold War. Now let's get to case. So first I want to just talk about, or rather, counter. Lasai, do you want to run You want counter plan here?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, counterplan is we're going to do NATO negotiate with Russia. NATO negotiate with Russia. So the counterplan text is NATO will negotiate with Russia as far as reaching an end to the conflict and what demands need to be met. The competitiveness is that this does not include any weapons and is also a different agent. The solvency is that we get negotiations and diplomacy and we don't get any increase in violence. French President and German Chancellor Angela Merkel and Francois Hollande are saying that these are the first steps that they're taking this week in talking with him. So why would we stop at the first step? No, we think that these should be continued. So counterplan is diplomacy. Now let's get to case. So, why do I not have, okay. Okay, observation 2. So the first advantage was titled Russian economy. First of all, I think that tagline is a little bit misleading, but I think what they're trying to say is Russia is superior and therefore Ukraine needs to be able to defend themselves. My first response is that Russia is not necessarily superior. If you look at Russia's economy, especially with oil prices dropping, that's hurting Russia really bad. And so right now, Ukraine with Western energy support packages, Russia is not superior. Secondly, when Ukraine can protect themselves, they have Western energy. Not to mention they have some NATO assistance. Sorry, I don't have time. So impacts turn them all and cross-apply my disadvantage one. Of Russia less likely to invade, cross-apply Russia more likely to invade, tensions increase. Their second one of prevent war before it begins turns it starts war before war should begin. Their next observation about give peace a chance, drop down to the impact level, cross-apply my disadvantage one, and turn all of their impacts about an opportunity for progress, a decrease in violence, more time for peace talks, and UN peaceful side. All of those are turned as we see more violence, less progress, no peace talks at all, and the UN not being peaceful, but rather antagonizing Russia. So I think when you look at this case all in all, you're going to be voting for opposition because we are for diplomacy, and therefore you're going to be voting for us.
Do you need anything?
No.
Okay.
Okay, for just a quick off-time roadmap, I'm going to talk about your counter plan first, then off case with your GA 1 and 2, and then go back to on case. So, thanks everyone for being here. Let's get into this debate. This says their counter plan is NATO will negotiate with Russia. But the big problem with this counter plan is that it doesn't have time to work. When you read the literature about Angela Merkel talking about peace talks, you always see that there's a timetable. The CNN talks about the door that's rapidly closing, how we can't get these peace talks in time because Russia is so close to invading because they're sending little green men, as President Joe Biden says. This is like ununiformed troops to go fight in. So all these proxy things are already happening. First of all, but we don't have the time because of this, and because Ukraine is about to fall, and because Ukraine, there's no defense that Ukraine can mount without United States weapons. So the first response is going to is PERM, that we have the ability to send in these weapons and have NATO do peace talks, which is the plan all along, which is why we have our second advantage called give peace a chance, because we need more time, because all these weapons are going to do is disincentivize Russia from invading Ukraine, giving these peace talks time to work, which they don't have currently because so much violence is going on in the region. Okay, so now on to their GA1 of Russian response. They say Russia and West are at a historically low in terms of, they're talking about how it's just like the Cold War, and that Putin says that it's going to lead to a colossal disaster. But why are we going to believe Putin? He's just trying to get us to stop sending in weapons. There's no reason why this is really going to, it's just going to do something that Putin doesn't like because he knows he has the worst ground in this situation. His economy's crumbling around him. He can't have a long sustained war. He couldn't even fight a Cold War if he wanted to. So he's saying all this is just like propaganda to scare us, which it's not going to, and we shouldn't listen to. Then they say UN is perceived as Western, and this is going to be a West versus East conflict. I'm going to turn that and say the East is going to see that we care about countries like Ukraine. We just don't like the big bully that is Russia, but we care about the little guy, which is Ukraine. All the NATO nations in that area, the former USSR, we care about them. So it's the world versus Russia. It's not East versus West. It's just a bad guy versus good guy scenario, and the world will perceive it as that. So you can, there's not going to be all these proxy wars because, first of all, Ukraine is asking for this, and we're on the side of really the entire world except for Russia. They say they'll lead to decreased diplomacy. What diplomacy is going on? There's very little right now because we're at historically low. We have these talks that are going on, but they're last minute, they're ditch, and they don't have enough time to succeed. So that's not. There's no uniqueness there because there is no diplomacy going on now. And if So it's very little, and it's too rushed to get anything done because there's too many things standing between Russia and peace. Then they say it will cause a war, thousands of casualties. This is Russia does not have the ability to fight a long sustaining conflict or have, because their economy is crumbling, like they said, oil prices are low, they don't have the money to fund a war, so this will just stop them from invading. Russia is not going to be stupid about this. They're not going to ruin their economy, and if they do, it will be worse for Russia than anything else. Yes, Joe?
So, is your guys' advocacy that Russia is like superior to Ukraine economically, or that Russia is actually crumbling
militarily,
economically?
they're superior. Economically,
Militarily
they're
superior.
weak. So they're like just on the precipice of collapsing economically because the sanctions are taking effect, because of oil prices, because of all these things. And we have stats to just show how. But militarily, they could win really quickly now. If it were a blitzkrieg conflict, then Russia could win and they could annex Ukraine. But if a long sustained conflict, Russia has no business getting into, and they couldn't even if they wanted to. So let's go on to proxy wars are bad. You can cross-apply all my reasoning. They say this is increased nationalism, increased militias, even though they have like no real statistics or details or like specs of where these like militias are going to come from or how they're going to end up in the hands of rebels. First of all, as long as we defend Ukraine, Ukraine has a good government that just because their leader now is new does not mean it's not a somewhat stable relationship. It's not like the wars in Iraq or Vietnam, and it's not going to lead to a new Cold War because Russia just does not have the economic power to sustain it. So now let's go on to our on case, which is Advantage 1. They thought that our Russian economy was like a misleading, but the whole point of this is that Russia does not have the economy for a long, drawn-out campaign. They do have they have military superiority at the moment, but if we send in these defensive-minded weapons, there is very little way for Russia to like sustain this conflict. We'll say that Russia has a bad economy now. They have an 11% inflation rate, almost 12%. Oil prices are low. They only had 0.6% GDP growth, which is terrible. Their bank sizes decreased by 4%. They are not in the mood. They could not even fight a Cold War if they wanted to. So you can unturn all their arguments of saying that Russia's more likely to invade, Russia's going to invade, because they literally couldn't. They don't have the power. They don't have the economic power. We'll see them crumble just like they did in the Cold War, and Ukraine has the right to defend itself. So they say this. So we'll protect Ukrainian sovereignty. So you can just unturn these back into all direction, and we have like Russia's less likely to invade, prevent war before it begins, because they know they can't win a long drawn-out conflict. Because we're going to protect Ukrainian sovereignty. We're not going to turn the East against us because we're fighting for the East, or at least part of it. Then they say giving peace a chance. They just went straight to the impacts, and they turned and say it's going to increase violence. Anti-defense weapons can be used for war. But what really is going to happen is Russia's going to look at the situation. They know they won't be able to win a long, drawn-out conflict. Putin wants to stay in power. He doesn't want to have some sort of coup or be forced out of power because of his mishaps with the West. That's why you see this Ukrainian conflict. There's a lot of talk, but there hasn't been so much action because Putin knows he's on thin ice here. Then they said anti-defense weapons could be used in the hands of militias, that it will go to somebody else. These are first anti-tank, anti-missiles. It's really hard for a small country like Ukraine to take all the anti-aircraft weapons and launch a campaign into another country. Ukraine is not a big country. They're not a power. They're not going to ever invade Russia. It's pretty much only good for defense, and even if they wanted to use it for attack, Ukraine's not going to be the one to infringe. It's just going to stop Russia being able to, do a fast, quick campaign to annex them. Then, so yeah, thank you.
Was your first advantage the prevent war one?
No, it's
Russia's economy.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So,
Let's start with the on case.
yes.
All right then. Give me your worst.
It's pretty bright. Gonna start on case in order, then counterplan, then our DAs. Okay, everybody ready?
Yeah.
Alright, so into their first advantage when they talk about how they keep saying how that Russia is like super superior in the military, but they don't have the economics ability to like withstand a war against Ukraine. But the fact that they say that our opponents admitted that Russia is far superior and can attack Ukraine right now and easily defeat them. However, their plan doesn't stop this because when all their plan does is arm Ukraine with these highly advanced weapons. However, their plan does not train Ukraine on how to use these weapons. And we've seen in history in the past that when we arm another country like Iraq, that these weapons are so advanced that it takes 3 years to properly train Iraqi soldiers on how to use these weapons. So just the minimum amount of time for them to learn how to use these highly advanced weapons that they have never used before, it's going to take 3 years. And that's without being trained. Your plan does not impose any training methods. So that means that it's going to probably even take them 3 times that amount. So it's going to take them a decade to be able to effectively, efficiently use these weapons to defend themselves. So that's like a decade's postponement of solvency, in which by that time Russia, like they said, could already take them out right now. When Russia sees this plan happening, they're going to see an opening. Said that we need to attack them now before they learn how to use these weapons. And just like our opponents agree, Russia can do that easily, just like they said. And that is going to link into our off-case arguments on increasing escalation that I'll get to later. So when they talk about impacts of Russia will be less likely to invade and antagonize, they're going to be more likely to invade, more likely to antagonize, because they see that this is their opportunity to take Ukraine over while they're at their weakest, not while they have spent years and years and years on how to properly use these weapons and be effective. And so they're going to see that as a tactic to attack immediately and right now, especially since our opponents agree that they can easily do it immediately right now. So that means that I'm pretty sure Russia believes that too. Can I use your timer?
Yeah.
And so on
It's
to
not
their
going,
next
though.
advantage when they talk about prevent war. Their plan does not prevent war. If their plan just increases wars, and you could just cross-apply or flow when we get to later on the off case. When we talk about the proxy wars and Russia's escalation, when they see that their plan is getting the United States, which is basically the West, and number one funded by United States, it's going to back Ukraine with weapons. They're going to see this as an act of a proxy, an act against Russia from the West, and Russia is not going to stand for this. And we know that Russia has a great history of United States with proxy wars in the past. When we look at the history of the Cold War and what happened in Afghan, we know that there is evidence that shows that proxy wars between U.S. and Russia is always very likely, and their plan is leading directly to this, which is going to lead to an increase in escalation and not preventing wars, but starting the current situation to get even worse. And so when they say on their impacts that it's going to help make progress and decrease violence and more time for peace talks, that's all going to be thrown away, because there's going to be absolutely no time for peace talks when Russia is going to increase their escalation on this matter. So they're going to have absolutely no peace talks, which is going to be a negative impact. You can turn this. There's going to be no time for peace talks when the West is backing Ukraine, and Russia's going to have to step up step up their methods. Like we mentioned, I'll get to the bottom of this. We mentioned that Russia has more at stake, and they have more to win for. And they completely dropped this argument when we talked about how Russia has, and just to expand on that, Russia has already lost financially from the sanctions. They have took human casualties, and they're economically isolated because of this situation in Ukraine. So they're going to go, they're going to pursue more resources and time and efforts to escalate. And you had a question?
Yeah. So, how likely do you think,
Very likely.
that Russia is to invade Ukraine?
Very
like how soon? What would
I think it would be just like you guys said. You guys said that Russia can easily take Ukraine right now, immediately. So I think that if you guys can see that happening, their official and experts can see that happening too. To take Ukraine right now before they're able to develop the training to use these weapons. Especially since your plan doesn't involve United States training or UN training them how to use the weapons. And if it does, then that means you're putting boots on the ground in Ukraine soil, which is just worse. They're going to agree that you guys aren't going to train them, and they're going to have to train themselves, which is going to be bad, and it's going to take a long time. So now to the counterplan. When we talk about how that NATO is going to negotiate with Russia to reach diplomacy and peace talks, and we talk about how that, and they perm this, however, they can perm this, but we're going to talk to you why you don't want to perm this. And because, like, when we talk about the net benefits of not causing a proxy war between the West and Russia, the net benefits of not increasing escalation of violence and increasing of the casualties, and also the net benefits of increasing peace talks, because when their plan is a direct link to increasing escalation and proxy wars, that is obviously going to cut off peace talks. So they don't get the peace talk solvency. We actually get peace talk solvency, and we get diplomacy, and we get the extra step to reaching a settlement, where they're just taking us a step back into the 90s and the 80s and all these proxy wars that lead to many casualties. And so now on to off case. When we talk about how that Russia and U.S. relations are basically at the boiling point, like it's at the very tip top of the boiling point or the brink, and their plan is just going to throw us over that brink, because Russia has even stated that it's going to cause colossal damage if U.S. Arms Ukraine, because they said that they wouldn't want Americanized weapons to be used against the Russia, and so that is basically Russia seeing this as an act of war against Russia, and that is something that their plan is going to cause. And us as the opposition do not want to see that happen. We do not want to see an increase of casualties, because obviously Russia does have the ability to take over Ukraine, which our opponents have agreed with us. And so obviously this is going to cause that to happen. And so, yeah. Yeah, and just like how I mentioned that the military, Russia is going to see this as they need to attack them now, while they're not trained on how to use these highly advanced weapons that Ukraine has never used before. And so on to the proxy war, they mentioned on our proxy war DA that they just talked about how that there's no proxy war because Ukraine is asking for this. However, it's not whether Ukraine wants this or not that's going to cause proxy war. It's whether or not Russia wants this to happen or not. And Russia definitely stated that they do not want this to happen. And so that is a direct link into our DA that this is going to cause a proxy war between the West and Russia. And we've seen from the past it leads to many impacts. And however, like we mentioned, how that weapons can lead into the wrong hand. We've seen this in the 1990s when the proxy war in Afghan, and how that these militias have formed, like Al-Qaeda and Taliban. And there's militias in Ukraine as well, which U.S. official has stated, in that we can't guarantee that all these weapons are going to be spent directly for a good cause. Some of these weapons can end in the wrong hands of these militias and cause other groups to form. And don't know where I'm at, so I think I'll use up all my time. Now to
I should get to say something.
All right, for a roadmap, I'm just going voters.
Yeah, go back.
Yeah, thank you. Everybody ready?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Lasai and I on the opposition team think that it's important that if we're going to be arming someone, we should have a strategy. So I want to say that moral indignation, no matter how righteous or satisfying, is not a strategy. And so with that, I want to address an argument that I think they're going to try to go for in their conclusion or rebuttal, which is where they say where we've said Russia is strong enough to overtake Ukraine right now. So my response is Russia won't overtake Ukraine unless they are antagonized, which is what their plan does. So only by your plan... Yeah.
New argument. First of all, you address this by, this is a new argument because you think we're going to bring it up in the last speech, meaning we haven't brought it up before. Therefore, it's a new argument. Therefore, you shouldn't be allowed to say it.
my response is that it's been probably the biggest issue and I raised it in point of information when you were talking over the last 3 speeches about the strength of Russia and how militarily powerful they are and sort of how that interplays. So I was just responding to it in the first chance that I had after asking a point of information.
It just ties in with the
first time
escalation.
It ties in with escalation. It's that argument it's already on the.
That's a whole case. I'll take it into consideration.
You guys didn't bring it up.
Okay,
I'll take it into consideration.
What time are you at?
30
I
like
think
40
it's a little
seconds.
Dang it.
biased, so I'll take it
I
into
forgot to
consideration.
stop my timer.
All right,
What's more biased?
all right.
You judges because you're
Tell me
on
when
the
we're at
team,
56.
or my girlfriend judging.
I don't know. I probably won't remember, Stephan. So just count like 15 seconds or something.
Okay, all right.
Okay. So it's the same way like the U.S. could destroy ISIS if we wanted to. We're more militarily powerful, but we're
Point of
not.
order.
But the more antagonized we get, okay.
ISIS was never mentioned at all in this debate.
They weren't. You're right, but that doesn't mean it's a new argument. It basically depends whether or not the judge wants to accept the first point of order, whether or not they accept that second part.
I'll take it into consideration.
Okay.
Cool. All right.
Okay. So now let's get into voters. First one, Russia is not strong enough to warrant arming the Ukraine. So it seems like right now what's going on is a prolonged war where you have Russian separatist guerrillas. So the government team has made the argument that Russia is not set up for a prolonged war. They will lose it. Well, that's what is happening now. However, if we are to then arm Ukraine with Western weapons, then that's going to speed it up and make it a big conflict right now. So that's the first voter, is that based on the current conflict, Ukraine is going to win it. The second one is our counterplan of diplomacy. You're going to be voting for diplomacy over weapons every time if we can expose enough risk in those weapons and prove that it's not an absolute necessity. Bye, Lasai. My third voter is our first DA about the Russian response, and I think we've exposed enough risk, and historically it just makes intuitive sense that if the West is going to do something, it's going to antagonize Russia. Our fourth voter is our second DA about the risks of a proxy war. Again, we think we've exposed enough risks when looking throughout history, especially in conflicts that like Russia has been involved with too, where we fund a certain side and that side ends up getting a hold of the weapons and then not doing what we want with them. So there's a lot of risk here, whereas our counterplan has virtually none and seems like it's going to work, even given the government's arguments. Our fifth voter is that Ukraine has no training with these weapons, yet the plan takes place immediately. Therefore, you're either going to get Ukrainians misusing these weapons or not being able to use these weapons because, again, they're American weapons. The directions are in different languages. Again, Lasai said in Afghanistan it took 3 years just to teach people how to use American weapons. So our sixth voter is that then essentially you're going to have no solvency because if Russia can overtake them right now, whether they do or don't, but it's going to take 5 to 10 years, or 3 to 10 at least, to train Ukrainians with these American weapons. And in that amount of time, it's likely that Russia overtakes because then they're still antagonized by those weapons and they go in and invade before Ukrainians have the chance to be trained with how to use them. Seventh voter is look to the turns on case, like especially where it pertains to diplomacy. Where we tell you that our plan results in more diplomacy and their plan results in an end to all diplomacy, where we tell you diplomacy is going on right now and their plan is going to undermine that by giving weapons to Ukraine. So essentially, here's the decision for the judge in this round. Do you want a risky plan that gives arms to an unstable government that could get into the hands of militia groups like we've seen before, that they're not even trained with how to use, where it's a really risky process and there's no strategy with how they will be used? Or do you want to go with the opposition's frame of mind, which is let's do diplomacy. If the Russian economy is weak, they're going to be more willing to concede, and a long-term prolonged war doesn't favor the Russians either. So it seems like if you want less violence and more diplomacy, you're going to be voting for opposition in this round. Thank you.
I have work to do.
I mean, work. No one will notice.
They won't. Did you have a section?
Yeah,
Okay.
and grew his hair out a little bit.
So that's what comes with the second thing.
It's kind of a given. We're all funny people here. Are we ready to begin?
We are.
Okay. So, what a great debate we had today. Let's continue on with my voters here. So, voter number one. Let me get to the page here. A lot of the voters actually coincide with my opponent's argument here. So let me just get to the page where we kind of talked about them. Okay. So our first voter is that Russia is in fact strong enough to invade Ukraine. They may have a crumbling economy. This we can all agree on, but we can also agree that Russia's military is still very much powerful enough to take over Ukraine very easily. And so if we just let things stay as they are, then Ukraine will be overtaken. And voter number two, our plan actually solves better than their counter plan. For example, we give them defensive weapons so that Ukraine can defend themselves, so we can buy more time to make negotiations with Ukraine and as well as Russia. And so we solve much more and we solve much better as a result. Because if you make a negotiation with Russia without any plans to buy time, then it's not going to solve anything. While you're making the negotiations, maybe 500 to 5,000 people will already be dead as we speak. And voter number three is that yes, over the past, if we gave weapons to militias, they would rebel and create conflict. But we're talking about a sovereign country here. We're talking about people who are much more capable of handling weapons and using them for the right reasons. They're not gonna suddenly rebel because they have weapons and they can do whatever they want with it. This is a sovereign country we're talking about. They can structure their plans much more better than a militia can. And I have another one in my head here. And voter number 4, I believe I'm at. Is that Ukraine? I have it written down somewhere. That Ukraine knows how to use weapons. The only problem is they just don't know. They just don't have any. Since they're a sovereign country, they are more than capable of handling these weapons more than other armies can. So it's not going to take them 5 to 10 years to figure out how these weapons work. It's going to be much quicker for them to figure it out because they've handled weapons before. They'll be able to figure things out just as fine. And voter number 5 is that we will have diplomacy. These weapons are not going to go to Russia and just destroy them. They're just going to stay where they are, and they're going to protect the country while diplomacy is being negotiated with. And so these, I'm pretty sure that a lot of these countries want nothing more. They just want peace. They don't want any more conflict. They want what's best for their country. And all right. And for these reasons, is why you should vote for the government. Thank you. How do I unpause this?
I